My name's Peter Wood, you're watching Hexham TV. Who are you?
My name's Diane Westwood. I'm one of 4 artists currently exhibiting at the Queen's Hall Gallery here in Hexham. And this is a project that has been running for 2 years. It started in the period between the first 2 lockdowns, and it started in a garden. So the 4 of us were having a conversation about how we were trying to maintain our creative activity in difficult circumstances. And Ali, one of the artists, suggested that if we had a group project, that might help us to maintain our motivation. So the project has been about the 4 of us agreeing a theme and going off in our different directions. So Dave is a painter, Ali works with ceramics, Keith is a sculptor, and I work with textiles. We have worked on the theme, and we would come together in whatever form we could, depending on the lockdown situation. So sometimes online, in Zoom, sometimes in a garden, and sometimes in a studio. And at the end of 2 years, we found that we had worked on 3 themes: the space between being our first, then folding and unfolding, and finally traces. And we also realised at that point that we'd accumulated quite a lot of work, and the conversation then became about, could we share this with others? And the Queen's Hall had been generous enough to let us exhibit in their gallery space. And the exhibition's very much about, yes, showing the work, but also about telling the backstory. So we have each said something about our different working practices, and we've each said something about how we've interpreted the theme. And I think at the end of the day, we've come up with a fairly rich and varied range of work.
And when is the exhibition on until, Diane?
It's on until the 22nd
of September.
Of September, yeah.
Great. And it's free to come?
Absolutely free, yes.
It's Queen's Hall in Hexham.
Yes, please come.
Hi, my name is Dave Barden. I'm a painter, and working on the idea of the spaces in between, this little group of images here were based on a walk that I made one winter's day during the COVID period, when I walked along Hexham Racecourse Road, and it was the day after a heavy snow, and I was struck really by the very strong interaction of shapes and patterns looking through trees onto snow, and also looking through gates and fences over the fields. So these 3 images are all different interpretations of that particular idea. Conversely, this one was done in the early summer, and this is based on a corner of my garden, and it's strong sunlight bouncing off the different surfaces in the garden. So this is a detail of looking through a structure in the garden which is casting very strong shapes on a hut, actually. So the green area is the background colour from the hut. So I was very, again, interested in the interaction of shapes that can create this sensation of looking at the spaces in between and featuring the space as the main subject.
Hello, I'm Keith Shaw, and this sculpture in front of me here was the piece that I did for the spaces between projects that we were having. And I'm a biologist by training, and this was a carving that explored skeletal shapes. And before it was finished, I realised that it was empty in the middle, that there was nothing between the skeletal elements. And in your body and mine, the things that hold the bones together, the things that stop you falling apart, are ligaments. And I decided to accentuate the spaces between the areas by fitting ligaments in, and that's what I've done. It's called ligaments, yeah. So it directly relates to what the idea was.
And is this something that you've done before, or?
I work in that kind of way, yes. I'll often start with a piece of found material, find a shape in it that links to one of my themes, and then expand it and develop it from there. So I don't start with a sketch and then work towards that. I see what I've got and bring things out.
Okay, Diane Westwood again. I've been trying to teach myself how to weave, and I was struggling with a floor loom at the time and not making much progress. And I was cleaning up our studio at the time, which has a log burning stove in it, and I picked up a piece of wood, this piece of wood, and looked at it and thought, actually, I could probably make a loom out of that. So I just wrapped a warp around it and set off weaving. And when the warp was on, it reminded me of a boat, and I'd been reading about the people of the north and how they had journeyed in boats between, say, Norway and Iceland. So the image on the weaving is very much an aerial landscape that tries to capture those very colours of the far north. And it's called Journey, this piece. So it's part of a saga series.
So what is it that you've actually weaved with?
Okay. What I really like to do in weaving is mix a fairly basic raw material like wood with some much more exotic materials. So in this case we have silk wrapped in paper, we have a range of silks, and we have a linen paper yarn as well.
Hi, I'm Ali Barden, and this theme, the spaces in between, I found extremely difficult. The reason being we were in the middle of a pandemic, and the only space between that I could think of was the 2 metre space between that we created for ourselves. So initially I went out with my camera, tried all sorts of ideas, started off looking at the space between dry stone walls. I just put my camera inside, took some interesting photographs, looked for nature taking over the spaces in between. It's a beautiful spider's web in the middle of a fence, a man-made fence. But I couldn't get away from this, what we had done to ourselves, this 2 meters thing. So I made these 2 sculptures, which are very untypical. This one's called Virus. These figures are all 2 meters apart. They're in shrouds, and the yellow is the virus, and it's just having its own way with us. This one, I was thinking about language and how language has changed across the pandemic, and the whole nature of bubbles, and we were creating bubbles. And to me, a bubble is something beautiful, and in this case, it was something restricting. I'd seen this image on the internet, which was actually an advert, and it was about traffic pollution in the 60s, and it was quite a positive image, but I interpret it again through this horrible time that we've been through as something restrictive and something that we all wanted to get out of. So this is called Bubbles. And that is as much as I could do for this theme. So this was our second theme. This is folding, unfolding, which I found much more productive. In this piece, in the case, looking from above, I interpreted in 2 ways the folding and unfolding of a book. These are made in ceramic, but also the folding and unfolding of petals and leaves in fields as the rain comes. So a farmer can look at his field and see rain is on the way because all the plants are folded up. So an interpretation in 2 sort of ways. Our last theme was traces, and this theme I really enjoyed. I thought about traces as what's been left behind and stories that are told in the traces that you find. So these 2 pieces, for example. This is based on Kielder water and Ladybower reservoirs. And if you look closely, the ghosts of all the people and they're jobs that were buried underneath the water when the reservoirs were made. The only thing that was left standing was the steeple, the church steeple, and a whole mining community was drowned really underneath the reservoir, and this is all that was left, fish jumping out and the traces in the top of the reservoir of where the fish had been.
When it came to traces, I'd been looking at shapes in landscapes, places in landscapes, and unbelievably, at the same time as lockdown, all over the world, people were being displaced, whether they liked it or not. In Eastern Europe, in Africa, on the south coast, we had people pouring in, up to 1,000 people a day. And I couldn't get away from thinking about that theme. And so some of my final works were about people in landscapes meeting barriers, which is what this piece refers to. And I've been using found materials again, in this case burwood, lead, wax and bamboo, as it happens. And that led me into thinking about the journeys that these folk were having to make, and how in any journey you need a way marker, you need signposts to show you where to go. And I ended up making a series of very simplified, almost aboriginal shapes that are similar to the old way markers that the Celts and the Scots and people like that would have used in landscapes in the north and in the north of Europe as well. So these refer to people finding their own way out of difficult situations.
Okay, so here we have the idea of unfolding, folding, and what I found myself doing initially was literally folding up different pieces of paper, card, fabric, and making drawings from them. I then, at the same time, started to think about how other artists had approached the idea of representing folds in their work. So there's a combination here of painted folds and sculptural folds, and they're taken from a whole range of artists and art styles. Piero della Francesca, Michelangelo, Egon Schiele. I think this one is Paula Rego. It's a detail of a dress. And I made my own representations of those sort of styles in painting and sculpture. And then I got the idea of putting the two things together, so the physical folding to make a three-dimensional form, and introducing the idea of other representations of folds. So here we have the two things put together, and I must admit it doesn't look very much as a resolved artwork, but I left it at that because I actually thought that it existed more as a proposal for something else, in that this one I could imagine being a very large folded object in space that you could walk in and out of. So as such, I suppose that they are maquettes for larger works.